Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. I'm Eleanor, and I'm a third-year theology and religion student, and I'm so excited for you guys to be with us today. We're going to be discussing real freedom and looking into the question of, does Christianity restrict my freedom? Maybe this is something that we've thought about before, or it's something brand new to you. You're so welcome and very excited to dive into this question. We're also going to be having a Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions about this topic or Christianity in general or anything like that, head over to Slido and enter the code #RealLunch3, where you can answer your questions anonymous. And then, so feel free to ask anything and we'll be able to answer them at the end. Usually at a lunchtime event like this, we'd be offering free lunches, but obviously with restrictions, we can't do that. So instead, this year we've decided to give away one free £25 Uber Eats voucher with every lunch bar. So to enter that, just comment what you're eating for lunch below and you'll be entered straight into that. So also, if you can't stay with us for the whole event, please don't worry. It'll be uploaded at the end to the Real Week website, which is realweekcardiff.com. And where all the other events are also uploaded. So if you want to catch up on Monday and Tuesday's events, feel free to do that, as well as the rest of the events going on into the rest of the week. So great. Encourage you to check out the Instagram and Facebook as well for the information. And finally, if you are an international student, there are events specifically for you guys. So head over to the socials and the website for that, where you can find more information on that. As you can see, I'm not here on my own today. We have Luke with us, who's going to be sharing the thoughts on the question, does Christianity restrict my freedom? Thanks so much for joining us, Luke. And before we get into that big question, would you like to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so it's great for us to be back again together. I'm delighted to be joining you one more time. As mentioned, my name's Luke. And I work with students in Bournemouth and Winchester, but also around Great Britain, exploring life's biggest questions. So hopefully that's what we're going to do a little bit of today. Another fact about me, I'm married to Libby. I love being outdoors, and my favourite sport is surfing, followed by rugby.
Nice. Great. Thanks so much. Guys, remember to head over to Slido with Real Week Lunch 3. To ask your questions and enter the Uber Eats competition with your lunch below. And over to Luke. Thanks so much.
Thanks. On May the 8th, 1945, Europe was finally free. Nearly all of Europe, that is. As the leaders of Britain, France, the United States and the USSR met on the banks of the River Spree, they divided one city into four pieces: Berlin. Sitting well within the Eastern German Soviet half of the country, supplies were already hard to deliver. And as the USSR and the West became more and more hostile and feared that residents would flee to the West, the Soviets began building a wall. Initially just wire fencing and not particularly difficult to breach, over time, blockades were set up. The wall became concrete, double overhead, tall and smooth and thick. Active shooting patrols were introduced, and food had to be airlifted in along with common supplies. the residents of East Berlin were prisoners in their own houses. Family torn from family, lover torn from lover, travel restricted to only a few streets, and a hideous quality of life. Things remained that way until 1989, only 32 years ago. In the weeks running up to November 9th, 1989, mass protests erupted following others along the borders of other Soviet Union countries. In an effort to reduce the chaos, the Soviets decided to ease measures and that they would allow people private travel without restriction. The changes were announced by a guy called Günter Schabowski. He was a government spokesperson and he didn't read his notes very well, so he announced that all travel was allowed immediately. Huge numbers of people flocked to the borders only to be told by the officials there that the measures wouldn't be introduced until the next day and that there were important measures and details on how you had to apply for your travel. Massively disappointed and feeling like they'd been lied to, chaos ensued. Mass protests erupted, and using cars, trucks, and every other tool they could lay their hands on, people began hacking at the wall. That night, the Berlin Wall fell. The people were finally free. We love freedoms and they matter to us enormously. Together, we love them not just because they hold back tyrannical leaders, but because we know that freedom treats us as we deserve and as we want to be treated. We see it as inherently the opposite of hindrance to living a good life. And we know that it upholds each human as able to pursue whatever we want to, whatever our joys and hobbies might be. When we're free, they're available to us. And it upholds that freedom to the fullness of human life. And it upholds it for whoever you are and wherever you're from and whatever you're like. Freedom is amazing. Of course, we don't endorse freedom without limits. For example, we don't allow the freedom of paedophiles, murderers, or bank robbers to do exactly what they want, or to allow companies to avoid paying their tax, or at least we try not to. So freedom exists then, not in terms of freedom allowed or freedom denied, but on a spectrum. Imprisonment, totalitarianism, state control, immature democracies, mature democracies, classical liberalism, libertarianism, and anarchy. It's not a one or the other thing. Now, I wouldn't like to say where Christianity sits on that spectrum, as different people will have different views on that. But we can say that Christianity definitely doesn't stray as far as state control, and it definitely doesn't stray as far as anarchy. It means enormous and joyful freedom. So does Christianity limit our freedom in any way? And it might surprise you to hear that I think the answer is both yes and no. Let's deal with no first. No, Christianity doesn't limit our freedom in the sense that since the very first days of Christianity, it has meant enormous freedom for the people who have lived near to its roots and its people. The early church, for example, in the years that followed Jesus, was known as radically and controversially life-changing towards women, disabled people, and minorities in particular. We chatted last night about how they would eat at the same table, how they didn't have the same rules of exclusion, and the Roman authorities had no idea what to do about it. So much so that they simply didn't know how to act, and they wrote urgent letters to one another asking, how should we deal with the Christians? They're upsetting the norms. Those things, of course, have led to enormous liberties and benefits as Christianity has spread to the West, particularly with the Romans. We often assume that as Westerners, we inherit most of our understanding and worldview from the Romans themselves. But that's not true. Their legacy was democratic to an extent, yes, but really it was only the most privileged who had the ability to vote and be involved in democracy. Likewise, it's the Christian ethos that built orphanages where the Romans had colosseums. And it's the Christian legacy that believed in healthcare for all people, irrespective of whether they had wealth or not. There's many more examples, including, but not limited to, education for all, that everyone should have the right to learn. These were enormous freedoms, particularly to certain groups like young girls. The reason is this: under its understanding that each life is valuable, which is on the first page of the Bible, and that everyone was equally flawed and equally forgiven if they put their trust in Jesus, it insisted on liberties and respect for people that never had it, because no one was better than everyone else. Everyone had been forgiven by what we call grace, that is, undeserved kindness, and therefore no one deserved to be treated badly. One of my favourite stories ever has to do with the companionship of a guy called Red and a guy called Andy. Andy is falsely imprisoned for a crime that he didn't commit. He never raises his head or makes a big deal about it, but piece by piece, he removes tiny bits of his cell wall and the tunnels that follow and empties them out into the courtyard. By the end of the film, he tunnels all the way to freedom. I believe that's what Christianity offers. Jesus understood our enslavement was to far more than to governments or to rules. He understood that it was an enslavement to the effects of the brokenness of our world, an enslavement to the way that we treated each other as fallen beings, an enslavement to a sense of deadness in our own selves that we just can't shake when we feel undervalued or left out or held back. They understood that it was a need for new life. So there's a sense in which, no, Christianity isn't about limiting freedoms. But there's also a sense in which it is. And that sense is in that everything optional is restrictive. You cannot be a surfer and live in a landlocked country. You cannot be a mountaineer and live somewhere enormously flat for thousands of miles. You cannot be offered a banana or an orange and choose the banana and also have the orange. Perhaps you could if you're greedy, but you definitely can't have both and have neither at the same time. Every choice is inherently limiting. The choice was yours, so you were free, but our choice is restrictive, whatever we're into. I think that's one reason why it's unreasonable to expect people who don't want to be Christians to live by Christianity's teachings. That might surprise you to hear, but it's true, except insofar as the influences of Christianity are embedded in our culture, or we think they work as rules for life and are good for us. And I think they are. Taking those two things detached is a bit of a shaky ground to find yourself on, though. We're not really honouring Christianity if we have detached its truth claims from its morals. And we're not really honouring our morals if we have no reason to say that something is good or bad. This is the problem we run into if we subscribe to philosophical naturalism. The idea that we are only bags of cell and plasma. There is certainly an extent to which we are plasma and cells, but no Christian could say that we're only that, because they feel it would make us worthless. For immorality to be done would be nothing more than nature taking its course. And yet we don't feel that way when we see old people suffer or children bullied. We don't see a child bullied and go, oh, it's just survival of the fittest. We have a sense that we should have morals, and those morals limit us. So, for example, Christianity doesn't require that in a secular society it should be illegal not to love your neighbour. But as a Christian, I think it's deeply saddening not to try to do that. Nowhere in the Bible does it teach that its teaching should be enforced by law in a secular society, but that's the logical, conclusive way to live if you think its teachings are good, its foundations are true, it values people, and that its rules work to make the world a better place. You don't have to accept that. No one is forcing you. But if you found Jesus compelling this week, you might just be led in that direction. So many Christians on these grounds campaign for causes that they see as informed by their faith. One such was William Wilberforce, a politician enormously involved in the end of the legal slave trade. We know too that lots of Christians today are involved in campaigns for various causes: water, food, education, modern day slavery that continues to this day, and even things as seemingly minor as doing what they can to befriend those who lack friendship. All these spring from a morally limiting system that they see as worth it and good and built on solid foundations. Why do they do that then? We understand life to be valuable because it's given from God. We're taught that every Christian is made in the image of God. Jesus demonstrated this too. We spoke last night, or if you weren't there, you can pick it up online, about the woman who poured perfume on Jesus' feet. Jesus demonstrated his love for her and his wanting of her to have freedom, not necessarily because he thought she could do whatever she wanted unchecked, as our world might have it. He surely would have had something to say about her actions. But he treated her with the dignity and kindness of freedom to be respected irrespective of her failings. He gave her the freedom to be viewed as a human being and to be treated well. That didn't mean he had no conditions on morality, but he believed that it had to start with treating people well. That is what Christians have shown over the generations. Jesus has a vision for human dignity in our world, and he invites us to show it to others. In a social change sense, then, the Christian message is treating one another with dignity as human beings and to love our neighbours as ourselves. It is pro-human rights. But that's not enough. In a grander sense, Christianity offers us more. It offers us freedom from our own failings, a fresh start, an opportunity to lay at someone else's feet that which we know limits us so severely and tramples on our freedom, not from the outside in terms of rules of what we can and can't do, but from the inside. Things like our enslavement to our broken world and the enslavement that comes from knowing we're broken ourselves, the limitations of my own body. We're invited to turn around from our own failings and to go the other way. You may have heard the word repentance. That's all it means, to turn around and to follow in the other direction. If you've ever thought about the cross of Jesus, his crucifixion, you might be aware that in dying, we understand that he took all the failings and trappings of the brokenness that subtly enslave us. That is, he died in our place. He says, I will take your enslavement to wrong and brokenness, and I will set you free in a more profound way than you could ever have imagined. And I will come to be with you. And that's what Christianity has to say about freedom. This evening, my friend Fergal is going to pick up the concept of freedom even further and engage with it more philosophically and personally. I'd love to invite you to that. Continue to journey with us. Let's explore these big life questions together and see what we think. We're going to have a Q&A in a moment, and there's loads of things you might want to pick up on, various freedoms. So I'd love to hear what you've got to say. I'd love to interact with you for us to work this out together. Please do send in some questions. But for now, that's all from me. Thanks for listening.
Great, thanks so much, Luke. Yeah, guys, head over to Slido and ask your questions in. We'd love to answer those. I'll just check the Slido now to see what's coming through. Of course, my Wi-Fi has to go slow, doesn't it? Okay, so somebody's asked, Luke, you said that Jesus sets us free, but what does it look like in practice for a Christian?
I think the first sense is the sense in which a burden being lifted. So kind of if you imagine someone carrying sort of a boulder up a hill, they're first and foremost, they're not free to run. They're carrying a burden on their shoulders. And really interestingly, Jesus once said, come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my burden upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And of course, we know what a light burden feels like. It's liberating. It's that feeling when we hand in our dissertation and we're free. It's gone. I think that's the first sense in which it sets us free. I suppose a secondary one is free to act in a new way. One of the things that Christianity offers you is a blank slate. It has at its heart the concept of forgiveness for all our wrongdoing, all our failings. And one of the things that I know lots of people struggle with is they want to change their behavior, but they feel stuck in their old rhythms. One of the things that Christianity and the freedom of knowing that you have a free slate gives us is the ability to start acting and living differently. In my own life, I know I've been changed enormously. I'm still a imperfect and broken person who makes mistakes and who hurts people. But I do know that I'm a slightly better person now than I was when I first started on this journey. And that's open to all, wherever anyone's at or wherever we start from.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, guys, anything else, send it in. We'd love to have a chat and just, unpack this a little bit more. There's another one just come through. How can following Jesus mean freedom when people who follow Jesus follow rules, for example, like not drinking, not going to parties or whatever, things like that?
Thank you so much for your question. I think it comes back to that discussion around the ways in which any choice is limiting. So Christians do follow rules, but so does everyone else who chooses any other form of life journey. For example, you can't be with a few exceptions, you can't be someone who wants to go to bed every night at 9 p.m. And be a fantastic partier. And in the same way, you can't be a fantastic partier if you want to do it the other way around. I think it's worth saying, though, just particularly on drink and things like that, Christians are allowed to drink. We know that Jesus loved a party. One of the earliest stories that we have about him was him at a wedding, and he's described as the life and soul of the party. So Christianity is limiting, but it doesn't necessarily make you a boring person. I think that's important to stress. But at the heart, I think, is the sense that nothing is totally freeing. No philosophy or walk of life comes without rules, even if those rules are kind of hidden. Even something like anarchy comes with the rule that you don't follow authority. So there is a limitation there. It comes down ultimately to the question of, do we think it's worth it? And just a quick story on that. I love to surf, and I mentioned earlier, sometimes that means I have to deny myself sleep and get up at 4 a.m. to drive down to Cornwall, put on a freezing wet wetsuit before the sun's even up. But when you catch that first wave on the best swell of the year and it's overhead and it's just a dream come true and you fly down the line, you're like, all of those rules were worth it. I think that's what Christianity means to me. Thanks so much for your question.
Yeah, that was so great. Thanks, guys. We've had another one in, and it says, why does the Bible, or maybe some churches, appear to impose certain rules on women if we're meant to be free?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I guess so that kind of everyone sees some of the things that's underlying that discussion. Those things tend to center on things like leadership, and then in very strict churches, also things like what women would wear on their head during services. There's a lot of discussion, and Christians disagree on this. So I can't claim to represent everyone here. My personal view is that women should be allowed to teach in a church, and also that they shouldn't have to wear anything on their head. So I think a lot of those things have been severe mistakes. My personal reasons for that are that a lot of the discussion focuses on a passage in the New Testament where one of the early Christian writers, Paul, is discussing a church that has clearly got some problems in it, and he's trying to show everyone how to be harmonious and successful together. It centers on that discussion because to be a true Christian, you have to put the Bible at the heart of your belief. You have, like with anything, you have to start with the kind of the core document, so to speak. So anyway, he's having this discussion, and clearly there's some problems. The text is really unclear. It's translated from Greek and a specific form of common Greek of the day that we don't have a perfect grip on. That means it seems to have some confusing things. Like it seems to say at 1 minute that women should be allowed to do certain things in church, and then only a couple of sentences later that they shouldn't, and then that they should have things on their head, and then that they shouldn't. A lot of recent scholarship seems to be looking at the idea that that Paul is doing what he does elsewhere in the letter, where he quotes something that the writers of a letter to him have said, and then he rebukes or reverses it. But he doesn't make clear in this particular passage that that's what he's doing. So it sounds like he says something like, in worship services, women should wear a thing on their head, but I say they shouldn't wear a thing on their head. And it gets very confusing. If you realize that he's quoting, actually, I think ironically, the men in that church, it suddenly makes more sense. He's saying, you say that women shouldn't do this and they shouldn't do that, but I say, here's what they can do. And actually, he relays something that's consistent with the liberating message for women that we're aware of from the rest of his writings and the rest of the Bible and the early church as a whole. Just quickly to add to that, the New Testament lists in many places women who are involved in various different forms of leadership as well. Jesus treats women with enormous dignity that we know is incredibly countercultural. That's a long rambling answer, so I'm going to wrap it up. If you want pointing to some resources on actually both sides of the discussion, which I think is really important, you can get in touch and I'm happy to help you with that.
Amazing, thanks so much. I think maybe we have time for one more question. So one up here says, hi, I'm a non-Christian and struggle with the concept of being more free as a Christian. How have you dealt with this?
Thanks so much for your question. Let me just read it. I struggle with the concept of being more free as a Christian. How have you dealt with this? The first thing to say was, in my personal experience, I have genuinely found that I'm more free as a Christian. It will be hard to believe me, but I hope you do when I say I'm not just saying that because I'm on a broadcast for some officially Christian looking thing. I have genuinely felt a burden of obligation lifted in my life, a sense of love that is stronger than I felt from anywhere, and in lots of ways the undoing of the various experiences we have in in childhood. Like just recently, so my parents are fantastic and they love me enormously. But just one example I've been reading around recently is things like being a middle child. I'm a middle child, which some of you will know makes you feel a little bit as though your older sibling is kind of the one that the parents love the most because they carry responsibility. And your younger sibling can be the one that has special needs when they're born because they're the youngest and most vulnerable. So you kind of get caught in the middle. And we know statistically, for example, that middleborns suffer with lower self-esteem needlessly. And realizing that I'm loved in God, and seeing as well as discovering, the obvious reality that my parents love me, has helped me to feel more free. Likewise, Christianity has opened lots of doors in terms of the people I've met, the experiences I've had, the places I've been. The first time I came to Cardiff was for Christian reasons, so it opened a door there for me. Of course, anyone can go to Cardiff, and they should. It's a great place. But yeah, I genuinely believe that it has made me more free.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. Your questions have been amazing, and thanks so much to Luke for answering them. Unfortunately, that's all that we have time for today, but if you do have more questions or you want things answered, get in touch with us over our socials, or you can come back tomorrow and ask them on the Slido, the same kind of format as today. Don't forget that we have lunch bars for the rest of the week, as well as evening events, which kind of unpack the topics. So freedom is today a little bit more. So do feel free to tune in for that as well, and look on our website for the other evenings and the past events and things like that. Tomorrow's lunch bar, everyone is absolutely welcome, and please don't think that this is not me inviting you. Please do come. But it's specifically for healthcare students, with a physiotherapist student looking into the question of is the end of the pandemic the only real hope for our future? So please do tune in for that, and there'll be Uber Eats vouchers back up for grabs. So come along for that as well. And don't forget as well, if you're an international student, look on the socials and on the website for ways that you guys can get involved and events tailored for you. So thanks so much for coming, everyone. Thanks so much for your talk and answering the questions, Luke. It's been great to look into this topic and the question, and can't wait to see you guys at the next event. Thanks so much.